This is the HR Engage podcast. My name is Jonathan Mamaril, and I'm here with Oloff Visser. Hi, Oloff. How are you going?
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Now, Oloff, I hear that we're actually talking to you from Australia to New Zealand. You're actually in New Zealand right now. So can you confirm for me, please? It still sounds okay?
Beautiful Auckland, and it's not raining today.
Fantastic. Now, Oloff, I've known you for quite a number of years, and you've got such a great, extensive background, not just in human resources, but also in that sort of management, executive space, leadership space. I could just read off LinkedIn and just pop out some of the companies and places you've worked in, but I've got you in front of me. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Wow, that could take a while. As you can see, I've lost all my hair during the process. I was born in South Africa, and the name is actually Norwegian.
Wow.
Because my mother wanted to give me a special name, and she researched the family trees and found that we were related to King Oloff of Norway, 11 generations or something like that. The part that she didn't read was that he was a Viking and he drank from the skulls of his enemies. So I'm very proud of my name. So lived in New Zealand for quite some time.
Yep.
Got involved in HR actually through a legal background.
Okay.
And became a negotiator. That was my first job. In those days, it was called industrial relations. And so my primary role was to negotiate wage agreements,
Okay.
EBAs, between the unions and the company. And I did an MBA after that and worked the MBA around the whole theory of if we can get labor and capital to work together, you can create some energy in a business that would actually take the business forward collectively rather than all this energy disappearing. And in those days, strikes was the national pastime. So get away from that sort of stuff. And so I had the opportunity to practice that.
Yep.
And negotiated stuff like the first health and safety agreement between the company, the government to be, and the unions, which was quite a big thing in preparation for the new South Africa.
Wow.
Moved to New Zealand, and again, it was sort of, where do you find a job? I came from a very big company, and I had loads of people working for us. New Zealand was a small entity, and got involved in employment relations.
Yep.
They just had I think it went from national to a Labour government, and they changed the act. So because I had the background, I studied this thing and started a seminar. In those days, it was the overhead projectors, that you flip over. Traveled the country.
Your age there, Oloff.
Whole place. It was just fantastic. And so really had the start in employment relations. And that sort of led into HR.
Yep.
And led into the whole picture. So by then I had sort of a legal background, MBA, and I worked out that the third leg to this thing was health and safety.
Wow. Yep.
And so I did 2 postgrads in health and safety, which sort of gave me that platform to operate from. Did some really nice stuff in New Zealand. One was the first family safety day. I was on TV3.
Okay. We're talking to a TV star then, are we?
And so we won the Westpac Business Excellence Award, and we had the Prime Minister at the time come to the plant. And this was a sort of place where people went to work and followed the day and waited for the 4 o'clock knockoff time.
Yeah.
And we managed to get this engagement in safety, which sort of gave us a platform to change the whole business. They give you an idea, we went from 84% machine uptime to 97.
Mm. Wow.
So those sort of things were direct related to that change process. So I sort of almost fell into change through that process without really knowing what I was doing. I had a few stints in Australia.
Yep.
Worked for Rio Tinto for a very short time. That was probably my shortest career move. Everything was there. So I was bored within the first 3 weeks. And then tried to change stuff which wasn't required. Then went to Laos and built a mine for PNOS, which was fantastic. Great experience. And really had to do everything so I was running everything that was not operation.
Yeah.
So hostels, transport, all that sort of stuff.
So quite a broad brush in terms of your portfolio.
Yes, yeah. Then back to New Zealand for a few years. Worked for 10X. Then 10X sold to Downer. I was sort of the one that handed out the redundancy tickets and then closed the door. Started my own business.
Yep.
Did lots of, quite a lot of consulting stuff. One of the highlights there was probably New Zealand's Navy and Babcock. We went from a contract for service to an alliance. And so I did the change process around that. And then joined Horizon Energy, where I am back now. So I was I think the first general manager of HR, safety, that sort of stuff. That's sort of where I got really involved in acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions, loads of them. Business was growing very fast and doing the people side of that, doing the leadership side of that. Then went to Australia, had a fantastic time. Ended up in health, and again, lots of acquisitions. But really the establishment of best practice, HR, safety, and really that bringing communication into this thing. When you have a remote workforce, it's quite hard to get real messages to people.
Yeah.
So that was a great challenge. Did a few consulting, went back into consulting, did lots of stuff in the IS, and then one day got a phone call to say, are you ready to come home? So I'm back in New Zealand for how long it is. And so I came back to New Zealand. This is probably a nice story as general manager, business transformation. And one of the first tasks that I had was to do the Peakon survey, which is the workday one.
Yep.
And so in 3 months, I took that from 59 to 83% participation, and the engagement up 600% from 5 to 30 on the NPS. So I was really happy with that. And then for my sins, I got promoted to run HR with that and have a project, HRIS project that I'm implementing and all that sort of stuff. But it was a great experience. So last part on that, mate, I'm motivated by change, energy, adventure, excitement, and as you can see from my career, I've been chasing those things and I absolutely love it.
One thing I know about you, Oloff, in terms of your journey into HR, you've got such a varied background. You just talked about, you're currently in energy, but you've been in energy in the past as well. You got health, You've got so many other different areas that you've worked in. Have you found from yourself, in terms of your journey into human resources, anything that sort of sticks out in your mind? I mean, you talk about the change side, which is, and the mergers acquisition side has been something you sort of move towards, gravitate towards. But has there been anything that sort of stuck out to you in terms of your journey so far that sort of tells you, yeah, you're in the right place, you're doing the right thing? Is there anything that's sort of in that journey?
I've always seen myself as a manager with the portfolio of people rather than somebody who just provides a service. And so wherever I worked, whether it was manufacturing or mining or health, I made it my job to understand what do people do day to day, not just the big guys in the office, but the people who actually deliver the services. How does a day look like? I think that's important. The second part is, how do we make money?
Yeah.
Because I think HR and the people side of a business should be focused on that part. You know, very often we have these fancy stuff that we do, which is beautiful. But if we don't add value to the business and the bottom line, your justification becomes very vague.
I wanted to sort of touch on that point of adding value because, and I suppose the idea that you need to have an understanding of where the business actually makes money. It's productivity side. Why do you think that's important in terms of having that understanding from a HR, from any perspective, but in particular from a HR perspective? Why is that integral to be able to add value in that way?
I think very often HR and safety, shared services would very often deliver a product that they say, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Without understanding the need and without taking people with them. So why do you need to understand the business? That if the operations people are not going to buy into this, you're actually wasting a lot of time trying to tell them that they should love it. So my approach is I love lobbying. I always talk to people long before there's an implementation.
Yep.
And I get their ideas, and I work very much on the old change principle. I have asked you, you have told me, and guess what? I am delivering exactly to help you. And I find that very often you have to look in the white of the eyes of people to get that right. You have to build that relationship before you can add value. I think that's one of the things that I struggle with a lot of HR places that I have been.
Yep.
That they are theoretically and academically really fantastic. I mean, the models that they make on paper is brilliant. But unless the regional manager in Mackay understands it and buys in, and that's the person that implements it, not you. That's the person that makes it work, because very often people would say to you, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's a great idea. And then you wave and you drive off.
Yeah.
And I can give you a story.
Yeah.
When I started with 10X, the business was really traveling bad. I'm talking about 10X New Zealand in those days. Apart from not making money, we were hurting people. We had bad projects.
Yeah.
What we did is we got the top 80 people in the business together, roughly about 15% in those days. We have just arrived here, so we can't expect that you would trust us. But we're going to do three things. We're going to stop hurting people. We're going to make money.
Yep.
We're going to communicate with you. We're going to tell you what's happening. And we're going to keep on delivering these sort of development training. So it's 4 things. I said 3.
It's all right. You can adjust it. It's all right.
And and we ask that you give us 6 months. And 6 months later, we got them back in the same place.
Yeah.
Same people. And we said, remember, we said we're going to do these 4 things. So on safety, we went from this to there.
Yep.
And we explained all these things. And then we said, and we've also done another 2, which are these things.
Yep.
So now we ask that you consider whether you're going to trust us and go this way with us. And let me tell you the impact of that. They had the Aon Hewitt. Remember that years ago? And they scored the lowest ever recorded. So this was about a month after I started. And the score was 13%, 1-3.
Wow.
And the guys in Sydney called up and said, this is unbelievable. Do people actually show up for work with knives in their pockets? The next year we did the same thing, and we went from 13 to 68%. And so that was the approach. It is, what does the business bring to you? How does the value add to what you do every day? And I think that's where my philosophy comes from in that part. Understand what we sell, understand how we make money, understand what, for that technician that sits in his van and go to service a client, what's important? One, that his timesheet works, that he gets paid right. So address those things first. That gets people on your side.
Yep.
Which means now you can ask them for the next thing.
And that is that whole piece of building that relationship. So it's not just talking about it, which you can, and there's nothing wrong with that, but also that you take essentially these little steps, which has immense value to the people that you're talking to. But yet that is it's almost like a starting point to build that trust before you can start to ask or deliver more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one part, is deliver the small steps. I think the second part is to tell people that you are. Because very often we do stuff in businesses, but people don't make that connection. I was in Sydney in a factory, a store, warehouse type of things with tires. And tires stacked up right to the top of the ceiling.
Yeah.
And all that I did is I started to go to their morning safety meeting every morning.
Yeah.
So 9:30, I was there. And I like talking. So every morning I told them a story.
Yeah.
I just told them a story and talked about footy and said, you see, Manly won. When Manly lost, I didn't show up. When they did, I had my scarf. But that gave me the ticket to then say to the guys, so what are we doing better? What can we do? And take small steps. But if you don't link it to, you told us, we have listened, that why, that message goes wrong. But the same thing with your leadership. These guys are busy. They have a day job. They have a P&L to run. And then what we do as HR and the shared services, if we add to that, we said, here's another form that you can fill in.
Yep.
You can't just recruit somebody. You need to do these 9 things. And you have to write the job description.
Yeah.
Now, any good HR person would have a stack of them sitting in their drawer.
Yep.
So why do we make it difficult? But then if you don't tell them that you are helping them, you've lost the point. But that's how people start to trust you. Just last thing on that. When I started in the mines back in South Africa,
Yeah.
I was an industrial relations officer, and I had a Toyota Ute that had 600,000 K on it, and work started at 7 in the morning, and 4 o'clock you would all go home because it was the desert and it's quite hot.
Yep.
And I sat there for 2 days and nothing happened. No, nobody spoke to me apart from the guys around the office. They were all friendly. And then rather than go to the office, I started to go to the mines.
Mm.
And I would go to the mine and I would walk into the mine captain's office and I would just have a chat.
Yeah.
And it took about 6 weeks before he said, "Oh, can you help me with this?"
Mm.
But I had to build that trust. And I think that's so important for HR. We have this thing about working from home.
Mm.
Fantastic. That's great. And there are pluses and minuses. But what I find more and more that the working from home has now become, I start at 7 because at 2 I leave. The business runs till 5.
Yeah.
So how can you build relationship with your customer if you're not there?
Yeah.
Sorry, long answer.
No.
Short question.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, and it's obviously coming through in this podcast today, on the HR Engage podcast today, is that your passion for, I want to say human resource and people and culture, but I just want to more about people. You're passionate about people and passionate about how that can be linked to the value that it brings to a business. And I think the businesses that you've worked in, pretty much, it's very, very people centric. It's like it has people essentially at the heart of what's required. If you look at the industries, I want to talk to you about, I want to ask you a question, sorry, about the HR side of things and people and culture side of things. You talked a lot about how there has to be that trust that's built. And then you actually have to show that value. You hit on a really good point about managing upwards as well, and being able to show that you're actually not just downwards, but also upwards. Has that been something that's been a bit of a challenge that you've come to expect now? Or do you think it's something that it has to be worked on over time to develop that type of skill or that ability to manage upwards?
I've always sort of found that relatively easy because boards very often financial, they drive a risk and financial world.
Yep.
So when it comes to people, they want to know that we pay them well, that people show up and that they're relatively safe.
Yep.
So what I found is that if you could put together a sort of comprehensive strategy that says, this is where I want to take this thing, the support is pretty good.
Yep.
I just did a 3-tier strategy in this role. I've only been in this role a short time. But how do we make this business competitive? How do we make ourselves the best? And I just wrote a communication thing about values. And one of our values is customer focus. And I've taken a couple of examples of where we have developed really good customer focus. And one of the guys said, we sell the same apples as the guy down the road. It's how we sell it that makes the difference.
Mm.
I think the point for me is we compete in markets where there are other people.
Yep.
It's not just us.
Yep.
And we sell mainly the same thing. So the difference is the people who do that. So when you explain that at board level and strategic level, people get that.
Yep.
So the second tier that I addressed was the whole employee cycle, the whole employee experience of working for us. Because if you don't have that brand part right in every aspect of it, you can never get to level 3.
Mm.
And basically then where I am right now is just fixing a bundle of things that I just want to. The HRIS is new. It's not working the way I want it. So, that's sort of the level that you focus on first. Get the basics right, then build it up. What I have then also found that with boards, they want to keep informed.
Yep.
And it's important to work with them in the sense of the value that they can see. I think that's important. So yeah, I don't think it's hard. I think where HR people sometimes go wrong is they start at level 2 and they aspire to get to the employee cycle and get their procedures right. But they don't align to the business plan. They don't align to the value that the business wants out of it.
Yeah.
And then they become caught up in, we got too many people, get rid of 4.
Yeah.
And it becomes an thing, and that's no value.
That hamster wheel. I think there's a lot of people listening right now who are just on that hamster wheel of dealing with fires. And I know there's definitely personalities that enjoy that. They just like that. That's what they like to do. But I think there's a lot out there. There's people out there as well in the HR community, in the P&C community, that feel like there's more to it. Putting out fires is definitely one part of the role, but I think there's a lot out there that's all they're doing, and they're on that sort of hamster wheel. You're saying that's happening because level 1, as you call it, is alignment with the business, which is usually going to be people in the board roles or exec roles in terms of providing that leadership and direction. And you need to have an understanding of that. And going back to that whole point of where does a business actually make money? How does it do it? And sort of aligning it towards that. That's your thinking, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why in the strategic plan for the business, you have to be there.
Yeah.
And not just take a seat. You have to influence this thing, and you need to lead more than just HR. In those meetings, you are the person that leads the business. I absolutely believe in it. And you have to do it subtly so you don't.
So I think what you're saying, Oloff, you need to subtly take a seat at the table. Secondly, subtly influence discussions. And thirdly, subtly lead those discussions towards a direction.
Correct.
Which you can then look to implement. In a subtle way.
And before you sit, you would have done some lobbying and understanding of what's the real issue.
Yeah. Because you've done all that subtly prior to, right? I want to maybe, if we could time travel a little bit and go back to the early career you. And the reason why I ask this question is because we do have a lot of people that are listening to this podcast that are more in that early career stage or have transitioned into HR and P&C. Going back to the early career you, younger Oloff, let's call younger Oloff, what advice would you have for him?
I think there are a few things. The first thing is things always work out.
Okay.
There's always an outcome. And sometimes in the middle of the night, you don't think so, but there is. Nothing stays the same.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is look after yourself in the sense of your sanity, your stress. I think those things are really important because you can't solve all problems today. Ask the question, how important is it to be right? Because very often the business has a different need than what the legal opinion is.
You're talking about essentially commercial risk, right? There's the action you would take, best practice, the legal advice has come through. However, it may be, and usually doesn't necessarily clash with the commercial side of things, but there are times where it's not quite commercially viable to go that way. So you're talking about
Correct.
the measuring of, or the weighing up of commercial risk, and how you communicate that. Is that again the upward management side of things again?
Yeah.
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 Switching treads a little bit. So that's sort of, I suppose, the early career you. There's a lot of people listening to this podcast that are also they're in human resources right now. They're similar roles to yourself, or maybe potentially that sort of intermediate range. From your perspective, for those who are currently in HR, currently in P&C, what are the, say, one or two big pieces of advice you would have for them?
Well, the one I've been hammering on 100 times: get to know the business.
Yep.
Get out of the office. Go to places. Go and make yourself available for the business, and the business will embrace you. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, before you implement new things,
Yep.
go and work out the effect on the guy that actually, and I keep on going back, the guy in the van that needs to go and clean filters.
Yeah.
How does this thing affect him or her? And try to understand that part. Because if we think through those things, it will make us more effective. And I think the third thing is plan, question everything, and then the implementation is so fast and so easy because you have ticked those boxes. I think those three things are really important, but understanding the business and being part of the business rather than being on the sideline as a service, I think that's the critical part for me.
You talked about, you really hammered home your essentially philosophy that HR needs to be part of the business, understand the business, truly understand, in particular, the main point of how it makes money, or the productivity side of things. You've also sort of skirted over some of the challenges. I want to sort of get you to point that out. So in HR, what is the biggest challenge you're facing now, and essentially how are you tackling it?
Again, there are a few. I think the downturn in the economy is big.
Yep.
Depending on what you do.
And that's quite something. New Zealand's got a downturn. Australia's got a downturn. We've seen both sides of the fence. We're not talking about just New Zealand, right? Yeah.
And if you are in infrastructure and manufacturing and those sort of things, I see the next couple of years are still going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at ways to diversify.
Yeah.
So rather than, if you're not going to build any roads, do you need to get into the maintenance of the roads? And maybe it's too late now, but those are the sort of questions I think. I mean, the energy crisis that we all experience across our part of the world is very real. And it's about that forward thinking about how do I position the business, and in our case, the people, to do that. How do we then take the people with us to understand this process? And if decarbonation was a big thing to get rid of gas and coal, well, maybe it's not a big thing anymore for the next 2 years until this energy thing is solved.
Yeah.
And how do I then transition people from this was the new horizon that we run to no, this has actually changed again? And how do I explain this? And what I have always found, that to have a story and to have I love flow charts. This is what happened, and then that happened, and then that happened. And people understand that. They understand the picture. And suddenly you can say, so how do we now need to behave? And they get those answers. So I think that's one. I think the second one is the whole thing about culture.
Yeah.
We definitely have a very different way of working. I touched on working from home earlier. It's here to stay. It's got pluses and minuses. One of the minuses is if you have a business that sits across the country and people are not in the office, how do you build that synergy of culture?
Yeah.
You can communicate the value how many times, but unless you can demonstrate and live that, how do we get people to buy into it? Now, one of the things that I'm working on is that the different businesses in different states or different parts of the country actually have their own cultures that aligns to the overarching group culture. So it's okay to do this and this, but you have to do these.
Yeah.
So you get the buy-in from giving people that freedom to associate rather than this is a corporation and this is how it will be structured. It's hard because I think a lot of people don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I'm talking senior.
Yeah.
To them it's, we have a product here in New Zealand called Wet and Forget. And you spray it on your roof and then you walk away and the roof is clean. And very often changes that, we say, this is great. And you have that passive support where people say, that's fantastic, great idea, tell us when you're there. So to get that, you have to empower them by saying that the stuff that they do and the stuff that they have is actually good, sort of helps. But it's a journey.
It sounds like it would take a lot of steps or a lot of conversations. I can understand the pull of a one-size-fits-all type of program because you roll it out, you decide whatever that program is going to be, you roll it out and you sort of say, okay, everyone's got to buy it, that's it. And we've seen it with, if you take some more global examples, I'm a big football fan. So Manchester United, they've done a whole thing of everyone's working from home, needs to come back to the office. If you don't want it, then you're out. So that whole blanket, and it's much easier to communicate that. And I can understand the pull of it because it's so much easier. But you're saying, look, you got to really affect change properly in a way that's going to build relationship, build trust, build that culture. You got to get a bit hard. It's got to do a bit of hard stuff, and that is multiple conversations, multiple strategies. And one example is you're saying each state or each district or each part has its own culture, but still built into the overall values or overall, it still hits onto something so that there's some connection with the mothership. And that's a really interesting point to make. From your perspective, will you always get the time to do that? Is it just a time thing, or is it also effort and experience and skill? Like, what does it involve, and do you always get the time to do so?
I think just to add to your intro there's also the thing of persona. And that's something I like playing with. Because the stuff that motivates Betty in accounts payable is not the same as Dennis in the truck.
Yep.
And so they are different. I normally try to sort of identify what those things look like and how you then picture the message to them or pitch the message to them.
Yeah.
Time is always hard. I think when you travel around, to get out of the office and to go and talk to the people doesn't take long. In 40 minutes, you can talk to 6 people.
Yeah.
And you can ask them one question each. And you can get a feel. And you can test some ideas with them.
Yeah.
But, the reality is the bigger your company, the harder these things are. But we still, because as officers of any business, we have to do due diligence in terms of safety.
Yep.
So you have to go there from time to time, even if it's once a month.
Yeah.
but use that month not only for one purpose, but for some other. I said right at the start, I think it's important to look in the white of people's eyes every now and again.
Mm.
And with the general managers around the part, people who run our different businesses, I make sure that I see them once every 6 weeks. I go and sit with them. And if it's half an hour, that's fantastic.
So just that bit of time, that face-to-face time, but you do it almost in a sample way to just,
Correct.
because you're saying it's not just to find out what's going on and get a feel of everything, but also you're saying it's also an ability to test ideas, test some thoughts that you might have, and you're saying that's not a bad way to sort of get some real-time feedback as opposed to just strategic and operational feedback. You're getting feedback from people on the ground
Correct.
But probably the question I have on that part is, wouldn't you have people giving you different viewpoints? And then how do you then calibrate those different viewpoints on different things? Like, I'm sure, let's talk about Betty from accounts again. Betty from accounts would have a very different view on work from home compared to some of the guys in the trucks or the vans driving around. So how do you then calibrate that to have something that you can communicate in a way that at least there's some commonality?
It's interesting, in the current workforce that we have. Yeah, same with in NDIS.
Yes.
It's not people that go to the office. They can't work from home. They have to go to their client.
Yeah, it's not possible. Yeah.
So that type of the question is probably doesn't matter to them.
Yes.
And are they upset that they from accounts work from home? Probably not really. The calibration sort of comes with the more about the messages in terms of strategic direction.
Yeah, okay.
And what you find is that people in the office are a lot more involved and intrigued by the values of the business.
Yep.
As opposed to the guy in the van, I think that's great,
Yep.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah,
Collaboration's good. Yep. Communication's good. Yep.
That's fantastic. Sometimes I think you fall into these calibration parts just through experience, and you try to work apart. And I think this is something that I talk a lot, but I actually think listening is really important when you talk to these guys.
Yep.
Because they want to be at par. They want to be heard. And not just giving your opinion, but sort of finding out what really works for them. Because often we would find that the stuff that we're doing is not really important to them at all.
I think there's a lot of people listening at home or watching this that would agree with you on that point. I think there is so, if you look at the HR landscape as it currently looks like right now, and I know it's a little bit different because we've got so many legal changes, which is essentially skewing how it's looked at right now. So I understand that. But you do see a bit more of a bent towards what you'd say is probably more the wellness side or wellness side, but not really linking that yet, or not linking it as much or thoroughly towards the productivity and the business side of things just yet. I think there's a lot sort of said outside of that. The more like consultants, for example, sort of saying in that space, but not quite linking it yet, except through maybe some general data, which is great. But you're saying, look, to really get it it's almost like a business by business proposition. You basically be talking to people, seeing the white in their eyes, testing a few ideas, lobbying, influencing upwards as well, to then, and this seems like a lot of conversations, you need a lot of momentum But if you just build a bit of trust and get a few small things done first, you can actually get that done much more quicker.
It becomes a lot
Yeah.
easier. Yes. Yes.
I wanted to change track a little bit. So those are the types of things you're talking about that's essentially your philosophy. I wanted to ask you about what's the one thing about human resources that people might disagree with you about?
I think a lot of people in human resources wouldn't, yeah, they probably would disagree. I question the relevance of HR in businesses very often, and whether you could outsource this without any effect. So if we deliver, we need to recruit somebody.
Yep.
There's a form. Whether I do it or whether you do it doesn't really matter. So unless I understand the business need and I understand the culture, what value do I have? And you could learn that. I look at the success of some of these outsourcing companies and I think, well, maybe they have a point there.
Yep.
I always thought that would be a good business model. By the time I thought about that, lots of other people did it. But, if HR is about policies and procedures and getting it right to address, there's a whistleblower policy, somebody needs to write it. There's bullying and harassment that we have to train people on. And all those amazing things that are important. Could HR become irrelevant for business? And I think that that's a concern that every HR person should ask themselves. And I'll come back to my whole adding value and being part of the business argument that goes with it.
You're saying that you question relevancy, but you're talking more, if we just take that as a soundbite, that's very controversial. But you've added the part as well that it's linked with, if you can add the value by understanding the business and where you actually add value, if you can connect those dots, then actually you're more than just sort of human resources on the sideline. Yeah, service. You're more embedded in the organization. So you got the added value of, yes, you're bringing value, but also you can affect change or whatever you need to do in a much more easier way. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is it's basically HR sits either there or here.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no middle ground. There's no ground where you just do your job and it's fine.
And for those who are listening at home, Oloff was actually, or in the car or on the train or wherever you're listening to this, Oloff was actually saying, like, it's either sort of the top or sort of the bottom, like, either there or there. And essentially you have the ability in the HR space to decide where that will be, right?
Correct. I have always seen myself as a leader of the business. And I operate HR that way. HR and safety and all those things are the tools that we have to mobilize people in that direction. Very often you have the people that sort of write the policies, make sure that it's rolled out and that people sign for their PPE.
Yep.
And I think that's the two parts of HR.
What do you say to people who feel like maybe they're at the bottom, where they are sort of just providing that service, almost like external to the business, right? They're not, but it's almost like they're treated like that, almost like we just got to run it by HR or whatever the situation might be. What sort of advice do you have for them? Because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening going, yep, that's where I'm at right now. What do you have to say to them?
I think it's very simple. Get out of the office, go and meet your customer, and listen to what they say. You don't even have to have an opinion. You don't have to be right. Just go and listen to what they say.
Yeah.
And when you do that a few times, they would actually draw you in because they would start to see your value.
That's interesting. It's really, I think it's a really good nugget of gold there, Oloff. appreciate that. Now, just to lighten up a little bit, Oloff, the tradition here on the HR Engage podcast is rapid fire questions. Now, I'm just going to ask you some questions. First thing that comes to your mind, and that's how we do it. All good for it?
No.
Yep. All right. So, Oloff, what is your favorite movie?
At the moment, I think Oppenheimer.
Jeez, that's quite recent. That's a recent movie. Why?
Oppenheimer, Churchill, Napoleon, those sort of
Wow.
movies. I love the whole thing about quantum physics.
Okay.
And the start of Oppenheimer is all about quantum physics, and I think I was sold right there. I also loved A Star is Born. I cried my eyes
Whoa!
out. It was
Oppenheimer,
so
Star is Born. Whoa! That's two different kettle of fish, man.
And something else is I very seldom see a movie from start to finish in one go. I normally lose interest and fall asleep. So I see it like a series.
What, you do it like half-hour chunks or something, do you? Like, oh my goodness. There you go. I mean, Oloff, I don't know if it's a suggestion, but at least he does it. Maybe try some movies in half-hour chunks. I've never tried it before. I'll try one. I'm sure I'm not going to enjoy that, but I'll try it anyway. Oloff, what's your favorite holiday destination?
I love holidays. I think Seville in Spain is probably the place.
Wow.
Sitting there in that hundreds of thousands of places and eating the ham and drinking Rioja and that sort of world. I can live there.
I absolutely can imagine you, Oloff, in Seville, just having a few wines and some hams come out, and there's a few olives or a bit of fruit. Yes. And I can absolutely see you doing that for sure. Absolutely.
I've actually taken up the guitar, so I've got this teacher every week. And she says I'm making progress, but I think it's only because I pay her. And I always have this thing. One day I want to go to Seville and sit with my guitar and sing to a lady called Gabriela, which I haven't met.
You haven't met her. You haven't met her. Just want to sing to her.
I would probably be old before I get the way I'm progressing.
Well, I mean, everyone's got dreams. There's your dream, mate. There's your dream. Apart from family and friends, who has inspired you the most, Oloff?
Specifically, two people. One is Julius Caesar. Can you imagine running the world without a phone?
Yeah.
And without a fax machine and any of that stuff. When in the old days, you had to do Latin for law, and so part of that was the study of Caesar's strategies and stuff. And I was always intrigued by him. I think more modern Bill Clinton.
Okay.
Has been absolutely inspiring. A couple of things. He did what he thought was right. And I'm specifically not looking at you guys.
This is PG. This is a PG show, Oloff.
I'm talking about his changes to the health system, which was knocked back, I think, 3 times.
Yes.
Until he got it through. And also, he was playing his saxophone. He had this passion for other things.
Yes.
So one of the books that I've read twice was his book called Bill Clinton.
I think it's Clinton. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up. Two people, obviously huge leaders, 2 different times and eras, as people have inspired you. Is that because you sort of see yourself in a more leadership space, and that is something that you've developed over time with that HR as that sort of building block?
I absolutely think so. I think I have always used HR as the foundation.
Yep.
So, I've always had this story. If you want to play for Manchester United, you have to kick with both feet.
You've got to do what?
If
Sorry,
you
what?
can't kick with both
Oh,
feet,
both feet.
you
Yeah.
don't start.
Yeah.
You can't kick left and right, don't go to the practice.
Yep.
And I think you, in our world, that's very, boxes and
Yeah.
compartmentalized. You have to have a ticket to get in. And I think HR has always been that ticket, or safety has been that ticket for me. So I see that as the foundation, because I see people as the real influencer of business. Whatever part of the business, it's all about how people will influence it. And so that's why I've always used that as my foundation to influence business.
I think it's a really good point. And so I want to go back as well to, you said that Clinton had this passion for the saxophone. And I want to ask you about that as well. What's something that you do outside of work that you are passionate about or keeps you going, other than those guitar lessons? Although I think that's probably one of those things. But is there anything that you're passionate about?
I love wine.
Yep. So guitar and wine.
Cooking.
Yep.
Cooking and wine.
Yeah.
I do a bit of running.
Yep.
If you, that's why I sort of just show my talk card, because if you see my cut, you would know that it's a little bit. And I play poor golf. I do read loads. I do read, 2 or 3 books at a time, and do lots of that sort of self-study. And I see that as part of that engagement and energy and entertainment.
Well, talking about books, is there a book or even like a movie or TV show or podcast that you could recommend to listeners? And what would it be and why?
Look, I think I went through book Kenton a few times. Yeah. Fantastic book. Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom.
Yeah.
Amazing book.
That's a great book, yeah.
Especially the end, where he said we have traveled many mountains, and now I can rest and look back, but there are still a long way ahead. So I can't rest too long. Fantastic book. Really inspiring book. And I'm a big Obelix and Asterix fan. Oh. I think the humor is amazing. And for anyone who communicates, those things are really important.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think you need to have that humor. I think humor is a good way to, I suppose, communicate with anyone, right? And I'm sure, look, there are people that maybe don't respond as well, but there are a lot of people, I think, really, humor is a good way to sort of crack through. And I think, if you look at the 2 books you're talking about, again, leaders, obviously, maybe Mandela was a bit more than just political leader. He was more than that. But, leaders in their own right who made very tough decisions, made difficult decisions, but also made a lot of progress in different ways. So I think that's really good.
Yeah.
I think you can learn from that, as an analogy to what you're saying, which is you need to have that, you need to look at it from a different perspective. If you see HR as just a service almost hanging to the side, you question the value of that. But if you can somehow understand the value that you bring to the business, and you talk about, in particular, a good example of just going out, meeting your customers, meeting the people that actually are on the ground, you'll get a much better idea of what they need. And then the other part, of course, is linking that to essentially decision makers, and how you can link that to productivity and essentially how the business makes money. I think those are really good nuggets that you've brought today that I think people can really pick up on. I think also as well, and you really banged on about it today, which I think was really good. Value can be brought in many different ways, but you need to understand what that is, because it's probably going to be different in different circumstances, industries, different people, personas. It's going to be different, but the first thing is you got to make the effort to find that out. And then secondly, then you have to start to actually unravel that.
Correct.
And how do you bring that? And then I think the third part that you really honed in is that HR is a great building block. And you see yourself as always leading the discussion, subtly in some circumstances, but leading those discussions. And people and culture and human resources are a great building block for that across the board. Now, I think you already had this quote from Mandela, but is there another quote or moment of inspiration you like to use?
Yeah, sorry, I have one last thing.
Yes.
When we say that we're going to do something, we do it. And that's really important for HR. And that's how you continue to build that trust. So that's my last point. My quote is actually written on the whiteboard in my office.
Yes.
And it says, the problem is you think you have time. And that's from Buddha. And everywhere I go, the first day I walk in, I write it on my whiteboard so everyone can see. This is not just talk here.
Yeah.
The problem is you think you have time.
Yeah. I think it works.
And how lucky we are, how lucky we are to influence people.
Yeah.
And to influence businesses. It's a fantastic opportunity that we are given.
Oloff, I think you've really hit the nail on the head on so many things. I think there's a lot of people listening and watching this, nodding their head. Maybe there was a few that weren't nodding their head at certain points, so shaking their head a little bit. I think there's a few points, but I think generally what you're saying, especially around that adding the value, knowing what that value is, linking that with what HR does, I think there's so much what you've said. And I think a lot of people get a lot out of not just listening to this once, but I think maybe listening to it 2 or 3 times, because I think a lot of the stuff, your journey also reflects what you're saying. I don't think they're separate. I don't think your journey actually reflects what you're talking about. And so, Oloff, it's been an absolute pleasure to just spend a little bit of time with you on the HR Engage podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you. Take care.
So that's Jonathan Mamaril here on the HR Engage podcast. Speak soon.